right ones?
Everybody go home. No, I didn't say that.
Wonderful, and we have lots of people here. Great that you're tuning in, everyone.
Oh my God, my professor's blue hair.
My hair turned blue halfway through the pandemic. It must have been a virus or something.
And I lost all of mine, which is equally bad. Who knows?
And in any case, we're super excited to be kicking off the Deep Learning course 522. I'm joined here by Lyle Unger and Catherine, and we will be having introduction in a second. So why don't I kick it off? I'm Conrad. I'm interested in data very broadly, causality very much recently. I have been playing with deep learning type things on neural networks, as they used to be called, for well over 2 decades, not nearly as long as Lyle. Let's see, what else can I say about myself? I like to lift weights and I like to dance salsa. And on top of it, I'm trying to very much interested in we can teach as well as possible. And just one reminder for everyone, please mute yourselves while someone else is talking. So why don't we continue with Lyle?
Yeah, in particular, if people could mute themselves, or maybe Conrad or Anka can mute you, but video is great. I love seeing people's faces. It's so weird to talk to little names. So I appreciate those of you who have images. And yes, deep learning. So I don't know, I like to say that I hate deep learning because I can't understand what it's doing, because I can't build in the physics and linguistics and things I care about, but it's incredibly useful. And I've co-taught this course once with Conrad before. I think we're making it better every time, which is super fun. And I love your feedback on it. And I'm interested a lot in language and what it tells about people. And deep learning obviously is critical for natural language processing, among many other things. In terms of things that I'm not doing deep learning or psychology, cooking, eating, bicycling, traveling in pre-COVID eras. I would love to go to more countries and more restaurants. That's my main thing I'm suffering from right now. I know, problems. And I really look forward to meeting lots of you and working with you on projects. I've done projects in almost every field you guys have been in. So I used to be a chemical engineer, and I've taught at Wharton, and I've taught in bioengineering, and I taught in computational biology, and they're all like super good applications. So it'll be fun to see you all, and I hope you like the course. Anka, say hello.
Hey everyone, I'm Anka. I'm the lead TA this year for 522. And compared to Conrad and Lyle, I'm obviously a newbie in deep learning. I took CIS 522 last semester and genuinely enjoyed it. And one of the most exciting things about the course was that it didn't only cover technical aspects, but also like ethical considerations and societal implications of deep learning. And that actually became my research area. So anyone who's interested in that, always happy to chat. Besides deep learning, I'm super interested in traveling. In 2018, I actually drove a car from Germany to Mongolia and back. Long story. If anyone is interested in that, also hit me up. And I'm super excited to getting to know each of you over the course of the next 3 months.
Awesome, wonderful. So why don't we talk first a little bit about the logistics of the course? I will then afterwards talk a little about the history of the field. And but the logistics, I think, are the most important for today. So Lyle, do you want to start here, or should I go through the slides?
I'll take over. I think either way is good. But so there are lots of TAs. I'm not going to ask everyone to introduce themselves, but they will be your key contact, along with Anka, Conrad, and me, to actually see what's going on, discuss the course. The course has a somewhat unusual structure, which we'll come to in a second. But first, permits. So we're taking more people into the course than there are places in the classroom. This is causing 10 enormous technical difficulties. We're working with deans and all sorts of high-powered people to get permits issued. It seems to require 3 acts of God and who knows beyond someone a higher yet power but we will get permits to everybody who has been promised one. If people are still on the waiting list, then the answer is probably no. We are maximally prescribed and won't let us take more than people than we can fit in one session or another in the course. Also, if you get your permit, it may say something weird like meeting at 8:30 in the morning or Thursdays instead of Tuesdays. Ignore the time for the permit. This is the course. It will be given with lectures now on Zoom, hopefully in person soon-ish when Omicron blows through, and you will all be meeting weekly with TA-led pods, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, I miss seeing you in person. I just wanted to say I was so much looking forward to making this course be hybrid and like partially in person, partially the notebooks that you'll be having. But it will, at least to start with, it won't be like that.
Sadly. Do we want to take bureaucratic questions, Conrad, at this point?
I think I would suggest the following exactly. Any bureaucratic questions, dump into the chat for the moment. If there's some that really occur a lot that are complex, we will go and talk about them later.
Yeah, and I think a good process is Conrad and I will take turns. Whoever's not talking will monitor the chat.
But yeah, let's get to this slide first, I think. There's a few things we will say that will already answer a lot of your questions.
Cool. You want to pop us a couple of slides forward? Since I don't control the slides.
We didn't go through this slide. So look, guys,
right.
This is an unusual.
Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. Yes. I'll do it. I want to turn.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is the most, I'm looking at the wrong slide, my bad. This is the most important slide of today. So after much work and thought and a lot of study of the cognitive science teaching literature on my part and practice on Conrad's part, what makes an effective course? And it turns out that sitting and listening for 6 hours a week to Conrad or me talk, although amusing for us, is probably not the best way for you to learn the material. And the way one learns material like machine learning is sort of 2 or 3 things. One is by doing it, and we will have worksheets, Jupyter notebooks with embedded videos where you will work through and learn how to do the coding, learn the core ideas. That's perhaps the most important piece of the course. The other piece is learning works in groups with discussions. We will have weekly group meetings, TA-led, which we call pods. And the pod is a chance for you to ask questions to things you didn't understand. It's a chance for the TAs to ask you questions. A great way to learn stuff is to answer questions. Along with every worksheet will be a set of questions you will answer, which will help you learn. And the pods will be chances for you to ask questions. Finally, as Anka noted, machine learning occurs within and deep learning within the context of society. And the pods will be a chance to talk about some of the broader implications. Where are these methods learned? So the worksheets are going to focus on things like how to get your gradient descent to converge in a finite time, or what the right regularization is, or how to structure your CNN or your transformer, or what a transformer is. Whereas the discussions will both clarify, so what's so important? Why did transformers completely change the way that natural language processing? But also, where are they used in the real world? How are they changing how companies like Tencent and Google and Amazon work? So there will be discussions. These are mandatory, show up at the lectures. The lectures today and on Tuesdays with Conrad and me, they'll be recorded. You can watch them later is okay. For the pods, you need to show up. Finally, learning by doing requires actually doing, and you will, for the last roughly third of the course, be focusing on small group projects, actually using deep learning to do something. Conrad, what did I miss?
Well, I should just say, at first, this format might be weird. And in fact, last year, we had a couple of people who at first were very unhappy with the format. After the course, I had a bunch of students come to me, basically highlight how it really made a huge difference for them. So bear with us with this format. We believe you will learn a lot with it, a lot of really useful skills. And I think it's just important to go with the format there. And the other thing that is important, I think, is give us feedback. Now, like we are, as you see, we are experimenting with this, which means that there will be some things that work and some things that don't work so well. There will also be some things that work for most of you and not for absolutely everyone. But in any case, we rely on your feedback there. We want to make this better. That's the reason why we teach it. And yeah, shall we go to the next slide now?
Yeah, one last comment. Studies show on active learning that students, by and large, prefer sitting back in the lecture hall and relaxing and listening to someone talk to actually doing worksheets where they actually have to write code and think. However, the same studies show that by actually doing the worksheet and doing the work, you learn a lot more. So we will do some talking because it's fun, but we also will be doing some working.
That's right. And I think this is very important from our perspective.
Cool. So the structure is every Tuesday at noon on this channel, also live streamed, will be a Conrad and or me talking about stuff, what's coming up in the next week, how is this machine learning, this deep learning method used. Then there will be for each week worksheets, Jupyter notebooks, which you must do and must complete by Sunday, the end of the week, Sunday night. The following week will be then the pods. So no pods this week. Pods will start next week, where you meet and talk about them. There's a question mark there, but they will be 1 hour. There will be attendance taken at the pods. You are supposed to show up and do that. There will then be homework, which can be completed at a slightly more relaxed process. Repeat. The course does require you to stay up on it. You cannot wait 2 weeks and do the worksheets later. The pods will not work if you haven't actually learned the core material you're going to talk about in the pod.
Yeah, and maybe to add one thing as part of the worksheets, at the end of the worksheets, there will generally also be a quiz. That quiz will do two things. It will ask for certain kinds of feedback for us that is important for us because we want to make the course better as we go. But it will also contain a whole bunch of questions that assess if you're learning the materials. And that is important.
And help you learn them. It's not just for us to assess you. More importantly, is by answering the quiz questions, you will figure out, you will learn just in the process of answering, and you'll figure out what you know and don't know. And if you're still confused with them, then you can ask in the pod or office hours or other times.
Cool. So we should also we are also making sure that as part of this course, you learn some about learning in society. Like, why don't you do the rest of the slide?
Why doesn't Anka actually do this one? I'm going to do some chatting on the chat thing.
Oh, wait, I have the deep learning and society slides at the end, actually.
Okay. Then I'll take this slide because I made it.
Cool.
Deep learning and machine learning in general is starting to shape our society. As such, we carry special responsibilities. Machine learning decides which movies you see, which books you read, which scientific articles you read, who are your friends, if you get credit, if you get out of prison, if the police searches you, and so on and so forth. Therefore, we need to think about it. And at the end of this slide deck, Anka will tell us a lot about like what we will do as part of this course to sharpen that. But this is very important from my perspective. The impact that we have on society is starting to be arguably as important as all the other things that we take together. So we need to be aware of that. Lau, back to you.
Cool. So one question is to clarify on the chat thing. We will give one lecture a week. If it's virtual, it will be on Tuesdays. If we need the physical space to give it twice live, we will give the lecture Tuesdays and again Thursdays in the physical space because you won't be able to fit all of you in a room. But the plan is to have one lecture a week because most of the learning is the worksheets and the pods. ML doesn't help you get out of prison. ML is decide who gets sent to prison for how long. There's interesting case studies.
No, Lyle. ML helps you get out of prison. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I missed it. You're going to get there. I've never escaped prison using ML.
No, you can't quite escape it. You can white collar escape it in the sense that there's an algorithm which says how likely you're going to come back, and they use that to decide if they will let you go home or if you have to stay.
Yeah, so there's very interesting case studies. In fact, Richard Burke, a colleague of ours at Penn, has written algorithms used by the state of Pennsylvania to advise how long people should be sentenced to and how long who should be released or not. Cool. So grading. Which is technically important, but more important for what we care about. You need to show up at the pods every week. There will be weekly quizzes attached to the worksheets, which will be graded, auto-graded. These will mostly be just true, false questions. There'll be homework, again, on a weekly schedule, fairly short. There will be a final question consisting of questions that look a lot like the weekly quizzes. For those of you who have taken 520 with me, which is like half of you, this will look like the quizzes in 520 and the final exams, except that the quizzes are graded. There will be a final project, which, as you can see, is a big chunk of the work. We'll talk about that later, but group projects implementing actual deep learning on real problems. Cool.
Cool.
So what do we want to cover? We want to ask a bunch of questions which are sometimes neurotechnical, how does deep learning work, but also much broader. And to do a successful project, you need to think about which problems can or cannot well be addressed with deep learning, how much data is required, what types of things can deep learning do or not do. Given a problem, what model? I mentioned some of my favorite CNNs, transformers. There are a lot of different GANs. We'll talk about a lot of model structures. How do you implement it? We'll be using Pytorch, as most of you have seen. How do you analyze it? How do you explain the results? How do you interpret these models? One of my personal obsessions, given this big model, how do I tell what it's doing? From Conrad's side, how is this inspired by neuroscience? From my side, how does this help us actually solve problems like language and vision, machine vision?
Cool.
Cool. So the structure, we're going to start out by covering fundamentals. These are things that you've all seen. You have all had something like 519 or 520, but we're going to go a little deeper into regularization, into gradient descent methods, AdaGrad and such, into network architectures. Then we'll focus in the specific architectures for the three big application areas: computer vision, natural language processing, and reinforcement learning. That one mostly being a future application area, but one that's growing hugely. We'll talk a little bit for fun about where the future is going. Conrad and I have some strongly held and maybe even correct opinions about how these things should be done better and what's wrong with the current systems. And then the rest of the course will be focusing, and we'll meet with you to discuss on your projects. How are the projects? What should you be do? How to do a good job on them? The language will be, of course, Pytorch.
Yeah, and I should say there's multiple levels happening here at the same time. Now, there's one level, how we group this, which is like, what's the application domain? But below it, there's the skill development in the ability to build deep learning networks that we built, which is basically you learn in the first 5 weeks all the things that you will be using later, and then later you put them together in different ways. So there's that level. And then there's the theory level where kind of as we go through it, you're going to get an understanding of what works and why and how. And that theory level will also kind of keep going and keep building in a way as we go through that. And so I think there's an interesting structure there. Great.
Cool. Yeah, so this is the second, we've done this before. This was purely online last year, the first round of COVID. So we have some experience. We have tweaked the format a bit. The materials here are all developed in an open source fashion so that they can be reused by other people and other groups. So they're widely available. What you get other than the Coursera is interaction with the TAs and with Conrad and me. One person complained last time, isn't this just the same as watching a Coursera course? And the answer is, well, no. The Coursera ones have nice talking heads, even though the heads don't have as nice hair as Conrad has, but they don't have the detailed worksheets, and they don't have the discussions, and they don't have the do the project where you get expertise of senior people helping you with it. And the one caveat on the materials is that we are building the materials back and forth between something called NeuroMatch, which Conrad may want to say a bit more about, which both uses our pen materials and then produces more and sends them back again. This is a typical open source development model, which is you build something, you release it to the world improves it, you pull it back to your organization.
Yeah, so
yes. Conrad.
So NeuroMatch is the summer school. It's taught worldwide. And a lot of the innovations that we work on this course, some of them come from NeuroMatch, and some of the NeuroMatch innovation come from last year's 522. And it was, and that summer school was developed with a lot of other deep learning people, including Lily Crabb and Joe Hinton and many others. And the side effect of that is you will occasionally have minor glitches because of that. So what they have a day format, we have a week format. You might find that somewhere it says day 17 on like a slide or something. We will fix that eventually, but for the time being, we're not finished with that. I want to say one more thing about first, one more thing, which is you will also gain a lot of useful knowledge here by learning in a group. That was one of the things Lyle didn't mention, which I think is gonna help a lot. The other thing is all our materials are CC-BY, and I think that's super useful for you, which is
Conrad, what does CC-BY stand for?
Okay, it's a common, it's Creative Commons license. It just means anyone can, CC-BY basically means anyone can use it for absolutely anything as long as they properly quote it. They have to, if they build something based on it, they have to say that. And I think it's very useful for you because everything, all the materials, everything you have here are yours afterwards, including the videos that describe it. You can share it with your friends. You can remix it. You can do useful.
And all the code on GitHub that you will use for the course. I often find people a year or two later saying, hey, can I steal this code and use it for my project at my company?
And yes, it's all yours, it's all everyone's.
And the answer is yes.
In any case, because of that back and forth with that summer school, that summer school is meant as a slightly less, aimed towards a slightly less sophisticated audience than you guys.
Much less.
But the important thing is, therefore, you will occasionally see things that clearly relate to them, and that's cool. And like eventually, we will replace all videos with like ones that we re-record for here. But we primarily want to have good materials, and therefore we will be reusing whatever we can that is useful.
Cool. Why don't you kind of do this one?
Cool. So we also want you to have a little bit of an idea on other activities within UPenn. So, for example, there exist other courses. They just ask slightly different questions and often very different questions. So, for example, CIS 580, 581 asks you what are the foundations relating to vision and computation. 680 can very much be characterized like what are the state-of-the-art architectures for a given problem in computer vision. There is 530, which focuses on foundations relating to natural language and computation. There is 546, which asks how and why does the mathematics behind the architectures work. There's 700, which is what are the state-of-the-art architectures for certain problems in NLP, and of course the STAT 991, which is about cutting edge of formal deep learning research. Now, these are all very different areas. And in a way, for many of these courses, CIS 522 will prepare you really well, and you can take those more specialized courses as after having gone through the basically foundations that 522 builds.
And for those of you who've had one of them, if you've taken 530, you're going to find the 2 weeks on natural language processing should be slightly redundant. Sorry. And similarly, if you've had a machine vision course, you should find those 3 weeks bit redundant. So this is a broader coverage of deep learning than many of the other courses. It will have way less math than the stats course, but I think there will be some degree of overlap, but hopefully not so much as to be boring.
You will also solve a lot of problems in a way that like maybe other courses wouldn't see. You will have basically the full toolkit on how to build systems from scratch. Great, so we have course materials, of course. I won't go through them here. Primarily our webpage, our Slack, our GitHub. I hope you're all on it. If not, that should be in the email, and so we won't spend any real time here. So this was the introduction about the way we structure this course. Again, it is a highly non-standard way of running this course. We believe it will be more useful for you based on our evidence of running it in roughly this format last year. We are innovating on a couple of things. But we of course want your feedback as we still improve things. But it's going to be unusual, and you will have to work with that. And if that pod format is maybe not the one that you're looking for, then maybe this isn't the course that you're looking for. But so in that sense, we just believe in doing, and we believe in good work, and that characterizes the structure of this course. We also primarily believe in learning. This isn't a course where we try to figure out how good every one of you are. This is a course where we want to help you grow in deep learning, and be able to really have deep learning as part of your toolkit by the time you're finished with this course. Now, after that introduction, if there's no more points, then I will briefly talk about the history of neural networks. And then at the end of the overall lecture, we'll be able to, Anne-Catherine will have more points on the ethics parts, and we'll be able to take lots of questions at the end. And please feel free to use the chat while we talk about the history of neural networks. History of neural networks is not really something that is going to be useful for you, although maybe it will. But it is something that I think everyone in the field of deep learning should be roughly aware of, just because the names that are there and so forth. So let's talk about history of neural networks. And please feel free to ask any question on chat. My co-organizers Lyle and Anka will be able to answer your question there. History of neural networks. It all started in 1888. In 1888, Santiago Ramon y Cajal started discovering neurons. What they concretely had figured out at that point of time is if you put certain cells on brains of dead animals or dead people, then these cells would be black and they would be taken up by a small subset of neurons, which means that that neuron all of a sudden would be black. So by doing that, you could then in a microscope really see those neurons, because normally neurons are barely visible under the microscope. But using these techniques, Santiago Ramon y Cajal could make neurons visible. And that fundamentally led to a change how people thought about brains. Before that, the idea of a synthetium had been super popular, where it's not that there's individual cells, but basically everything is kind of really connected to everything else. What they discovered in 1888 is that neurons are individual things. Later on, it was called neurons, but by seeing that neurons are individual things, that in a way gives the background for all of neural networks. Like what we do now is we say we have lots of individual neurons. They individually run a learning algorithm. We can meaningfully view them as being distinct from one another. And then we can optimize the properties of them. And so that is kind of the very old literature from that field. Now, next, also from roughly that time, was the realization of what's called dynamic polarization. What's dynamic polarization? In dynamic polarization, we have a neuron. It has inputs coming from one side. It's called a dendrite. The inputs to neurons are called dendrites. And then these inputs get transmitted actively through an axon. It's like an electrical wire, only that it has amplifiers as it goes. And that's transmitted to a terminal. And we now know that we have spikes. So where the code that is being sent is basically we have one signal sent after another. What happens electrically? Activity goes up, voltage goes up, then it goes back down, and then it goes back to a baseline. So the law of dynamic polarization is that information travels in one direction. So if you look on the right-hand side, you see these big, beautiful colored neurons here, where you see all these little, do you see these little dots that are on the dendrites? They are what's called spines, and they are part of the synapses there. So a synapse is the connection of one neuron to another. And so then we have these neurons, and they integrate information from lots of inputs. And if then the output goes beyond a certain threshold, which we know now, the neuron will produce a spike. But the important thing here is each neuron has one input and it has one output. That characterizes today the bulk of today's neural networks. There's alternatives. There exists energy-based networks, say, where when there's a connection forward, you also have connections backwards. But the bulk of neural networks as we know them today, in a way, obeys this law of dynamic polarization. Let's briefly talk about an axon. Neuroscientists just really love axons. And the reason is because they're one of the few things in neuroscience that we really, really understand. How should we think? So axon is the electrical amplified wire that connects one neuron to other neurons, that sends the signal away from a neuron. Now, the axon is it's basically salty water covered by a strongly isolating membrane. So what do we have there? We have resistors here below the word inside. You see the resistors. So the idea is along the salty inside of the axon, current flows, and those are those resistors. Now, there's of course a capacitance. Now we are talking about very, very thin membranes and very, very long axons, and therefore the capacitance is very important. So we have relatively high capacitance here, and then on top of that we have three so-called currents here. We have a so-called leakage current. It basically means that current somehow flows out of the cells through like whatever mechanism, small holes or something like that. And then there's two active currents, the sodium current that we have as G and A on the right-hand side, and GK, which is the potassium current. What do the two of them do? The sodium channel makes it go up. The potassium channel makes it go down. The sodium channel has effectively threshold kinetics. If the voltage is above some value, it keeps pulling it up. The potassium channel activates over time, and therefore it will eventually put it back up. So with this, we have the mechanism that defines how we get signals from one cell to the other. We also have that what a cell does is a threshold mechanism. If it's above some value, it's going to produce a spike, otherwise it won't. And then in the 1940s, they started trying to formalize that. And here's the simplest models that we have. We have inputs, xi, x1 up to xn, and we have a threshold theta. What the neuron does It takes all the inputs, it adds them up together. Now, why are we talking about adding it up together? We basically have the neuron with its big dendritic tree. We have the inputs coming to all the places. From all the synapses, there's going to be currents that flow to the soma, to the cell body of the cell. And therefore, this seemed like a good model at the time. And so what the neuron does is it takes the inputs, it adds them up all together, and then if the output is greater than some threshold, it will fire. And so the inputs are the xi, the output is just binary. It's either yes, we fire, or no, we don't fire. And in that sense, the function that it implements is the sum over the xi greater than some threshold theta. And if yes, the output is going to be a spike, otherwise it will not be a spike. And in a way, this is the linear threshold unit. In a way, we are still using it. No, if you look at modern deep learning, and we'll hear a lot about that, and we use things like ReLU, it has this property. It's thresholded. If it's above some value, you have output, otherwise you don't. And in this case, the threshold is not learned. In fact, like how to learn that was quite unclear. Now, forward in time, some 20 years, slightly less than.
Conrad, quick
Yes.
question in the chat. What is the theta in inputs?
What is the what?
Theta
The
in the input.
Theta, sorry.
Theta. So theta is the threshold of the cell. The idea is that it's something biophysically set. In a way, it's how much input do you need so that you will be active? Okay, great question. Now, 15 years later, we have more or less the same neuron model. It's slightly different now. Let's look at the differences. We now take each of the inputs and we weigh them. So we have sum of I is 1 to n of wi xi. So they're weighted. The way to think biologically about it is the connection from one neuron on another can be a strong connection or it can be a weak connection. In a simplistic model, you might say it's a big connection or it's a small connection. Now, a lot of things here are the same as it was before. Like the input is now a vector x out of Rn. It's no longer binary. It can be continuous. The weights are a binary, and but the function still just is going to be yes on, or it's going to be yes, or it's going to be is it going to be off. Now, Rosenblatt actually built this, and there's a very cool story that goes with it. But let's go forward here. Now, what happened to theta? Like we now have a threshold that's at 0. What do people do in practice? They almost always, and we do that in deep learning all the time, where we say we take the input vector x and we just append a 1 at the end, because otherwise we will always have the weights, and then we will also always have a bias. And that just makes dealing with things cumbersome, because like basically all our equations have an extra variable. Instead, we can simply have the convention, which is let's take every vector that we will ever do regression on and like add a 1 at the end of it. And then the bias basically gets soaked up by that, because 1 times Wn is then the threshold effectively. Okay, it looks very similar to what we had before. Rosenblatt's perceptron dendrites with lots of inputs, cell body, and ultimately produces an output. Now, the algorithm that Rosenblatt uses is a very simple algorithm. We initialize W to be a random vector in the beginning, W0. Then we give it a training example, X and Y. So X, we're in the domain of supervised learning. Now, like X is a vector, Y is going to be 0 or 1. We want the output to be 1, or we want the output to be 0. And we then have the output. Let's call the output Y hat here. And then we update the weights. What we do is we update the weights as WT plus 1 is WT. So we change the weight by, and then we have alpha times Y minus Y hat X. Now, Y is as it should be. Y hat is the output of like our little neuron. So what we have is we have error. Y minus Y hat is the error. We take that, multiply it with alpha, which is a small number, and multiply it with input vector. And there we have an update. And then repeat steps 2 to 4 for a desired number of iterations. And we can show that provably under certain assumptions, this gets to the solution that minimizes the mean squared error in this case. Now, there was a cool thing, which is, keep in mind, this is the 50s. So this is not the time where they have big graphics cards or something. So how would you build it if you're in the 50s? Now imagine you're like, wow, this cool algorithm is going to solve lots of problems, which is, Rosenblatt went so far and said, like, this thing will think in the future like humans and will make decisions like humans and will feel like humans and will dance like humans. And it was a big mistake that he did there. But how would you do it? If you wanted to build it in the 50s, how would you do it? Think about it. Well, we need this multiplication. No, we need like WT times X. Now X feels like, okay, we're gonna have lots of electrical wires going in. No, we will now build this electrically. W, what can we do? Well, we can use a potentiometer, and like just a resistor that you can change. And I'm not sure if this is still very popular, but suddenly when I was into electronics, they had like all these potentiometers where you could like screw on it and you could rotate it like this, and you could thereby choose how strong the resistor is. So with that, we could have a perceptron, but only we'd still need humans to then say, okay, this was wrong. This was the input. Now let's do the lookup how we should change all the weights. That would take forever. So what they did, can you imagine how they'd solve that problem? They took motors. So every of these potentiometers had a shaft and had a motor. Now, the motor needs to be regulated. But what they did is they basically made it that the X, the input, is providing the power supply for the motor. So if on a given channel the X was 0, then simply the motor will be off. Okay, and then you just needed to, how long you needed, how strong you needed the potentiometers to move needed to be proportional to the error. Okay, so with this, they could basically build hardware to do linear regression, which was pretty crazy if you think about it. And it could do simple things. It could recognize patterns. It could recognize things like, is this a hand or something like that? So they get like super excited. They wrote incredibly arrogant publicity statements where they said, we will solve intelligence with this. Well, no. And here's the exoprom. Now, like a lot of you will have undoubtedly seen the exoprom. Exoprom is a logical table, a truth table. If the inputs are both 0, then the output should be 0. If the inputs are both 1, the output should also be 0. But if the first output is 1 and the second input is 1 and the second 0, or this first one is 0 and the second is 1, it should be 1. In a way, it just says, are they different, the inputs? Now, it seems like the most trivial thing. If your system was really intelligent, it should be able to learn that, if anything. Well, it turns out that it can't. So here you can say in that x1, x2 space, we can plot. Green means output must be 1. Red means output must be 0. So what do we have here? We have at 2 diagonals, we have that it must be 1, and at the 2 other diagonals, it must be 0. For this problem, there cannot be a linear solution. And indeed, Marvin Minsky, like you cannot draw a line that separates the positive from the negative examples in that case. And it's impossible, therefore, to solve the exoprom with a simple perceptron. So Marvin Minsky wrote a paper that more or less just said, well, look, you can't even do XOR and you talk about intelligence, haha, bad idea. And what he also said, also managed to do is he told all funding agencies that neural networks are like a really bad idea. And with that, the entire field tanked. So they couldn't solve any problems that were linearly separable. And here you see what the effect is. They call it neural winters, which is on the y-axis. You have the percent of usage of the English neural networks. in papers from 1940s to 1970s. On the x-axis, you have when it was published. On the y-axis, the percentage of the phrase neural network. And you could see that it had like this high time in the 50s, McCulloch and Pitt's time. Then it had a high time Rosenblatt type models here. And then, hey, it can't do XOR, and the whole field tanked. That's the first winter. Now, of course, we know that in reality, solving problems like XOR is like really, really easy. In fact, we will maybe use XOR once or twice as part of the class. It's just a fun problem to try something with. If we have a multi-layer perceptron, it's actually no problem at all. We have multiple inputs. We have projection into a hidden layer, and then we have projection to an output layer. And you could see, let's go back to XOR. How would we solve the XOR problem? We could, for example, say if the first variable is 1 and the second variable is also 1, which is a linearly solvable problem, like both of them 1. It would be, are we up there? Then make hidden variable number 1 active. And if they're both 0, make hidden variable 2 active. And then you can say, well, and if either of them is active, then we must be in the false case. So in that sense, it's clear that you can solve XOR problems with such multi-layer perceptrons. In fact, you can solve any problem with it. And but we first need some solutions for that, because that simple idea of having potentiometers that are turned on and off isn't going to be useful here. So we'll be using, in this case, chain rule to calculate partial derivatives of the cost with respect to every parameter. Now, every parameter, every float operation performed by a computer at some level involves elementary binary operations, plus, minus, multiplied, divided by, and elementary functions like sines or cosines or exponentials or something. So we can write this all out as a so-called compute graph. Over the course, we will learn a lot more about it. And then you can say we have the computation going forward and we have the gradients going backwards. The gradients of the output tell us how much better would our output, our loss have been if we had changed the output. And then if we have a function, it basically can be divided into the part relating to the input X and the part relating to the input Y. And ultimately, we use the chain rule to solve such backpropagation problems. And we will also be getting to that, but of course, Pytorch does all this under the hood, and you don't need to worry about that. In any case, after they solved this problem of allowing multi-layer systems, you can easily see that it can approximate any function. So in blue on the right-hand side, we have one function. And then you can say, well, how could we approximate that function? Well, we can, in the first layer, have a locally linear function, say the blue one here, and we use that to get this first part right. And then we have a second part that we use to get the second one right, and so on and so forth. And I believe we will be having some exercises for you to do that. In any case, any function we can approximate arbitrarily well by just about any nonlinear set of hierarchical systems. So in any case, what was the effect? Once we were able to do that, neural networks came back. So there was that early winter that happened here around in the 60s. And then in the 80s, late 80s, it started becoming popular again because, hey, we could solve problems. And people were starting back then to be able to solve some problems that were at least in a way interesting. So in 1986, there were still two big problems with neural networks. And like the first problem went away. With backpropagation depth, we were able to solve the problem of not being able to represent certain functions. But we still had two other problems, which is backpropagation takes forever to converge. We didn't have enough compute power to efficiently run the model, and not enough labeled data to train the neural network. Now, like through Moore's law, progress in compute speed was incredible. Now, like you probably have seen over the last 10 years how much faster and more powerful computers get. Now, take that and go back 40 years. computing was very difficult and very, very slow back then. And not only that, but in the 80s, people in the years following the 80s, people were starting to use other machine learning techniques. And when it came about how much compute it takes and how much labeled data you needed, at that time, neural networks were heavily outclassed by support vector machines. As such, starting from the 90s came a period of lull where neural networks were really, really not cool. And I remember it, I started my PhD thesis sometimes in the mid-90s, slightly late 90s. And it was a super strong predictor that a conference would reject your paper, including the conference in Europe that we now all know as arguably the prime conference for neural network research. If you use the words neural networks, you were almost guaranteed to be rejected because everyone knew that support vector machines were better. And I want to just share how it was feeling back then. So in a way, support vector machines, they had like this really clean theory behind it, and you probably have been exposed to it. So in a way, it felt like neural networks was like the Stone Age. It was arbitrary. There was no theory behind it. It was just people doing stuff, and sometimes it would work. But that's not the kind of knowledge that we want to have. It's not generalizable. No one understands why they work. That's why basically in the late 90s, neural networks were really not cool. And everyone thought they were going to go away eventually through enlightenment and we would be doing better things. Well, the two big problems for neural networks went away. The first one is compute continued increasing, and not just the regular way how CPUs were improving. You can see that how over time CPUs were changing, but above all, GPUs were getting incredibly fast, giving you up to a factor of 100 or so in speed relative to the leading CPUs. Even more so when it came to peak memory bandwidth. So a neural network, as we'll see as part of the course, a lot of the problem is that we need to take all the data, all the training samples, get it into the system, compute on it, and then throw it away because we're finished with it. Therefore, peak memory bandwidth is super important, and peak memory bandwidth has been growing tremendously for GPUs. So why are GPUs so good at matrix multiplications? They have much higher bandwidth than CPUs. They have much better parallelization, and they have a lot more register memory. So GPUs took away the problem that we didn't have enough compute power, which left one other problem, which is not enough labeled data to train neural networks. Neural networks have a lot of parameters. And if you've been exposed to ideas of regularization and overfitting, you know that if we have models that have a lot of parameters, they will often overfit. So we needed more data to properly train our networks. And lots of data was coming in the early 2000s. So in 2005, there was Pascal visual object classes, 20 classes, 27,000 annotations. Then ImageNet, 27 categories, 20,000 subcategories, 1 million images. Coco, same thing, only now we also had bounding boxes to it. Open images, 9 million images, 16 million bounding boxes. So in that data set, we don't only have like what are the classes, but we have like, there's a cat right here on the screen. And that's of course gives much more data. And we also learned over time the importance of data augmentation, which is more data is tremendously useful for in deep learning. So we started taking images, cropping them, rotating them, adding noise, changing the colors and so forth to have even more data. Now, maybe as a side note, who cares that there's a lot of data in the world if we can't properly download it? But also average household download speeds massively increased over that period of time, even more so for universities. So all of a sudden, producing large data sets was feasible, downloading them was feasible, and we had the GPU to train it. So those problems were gone. Now, arguably we can view the 2010s as the decade of domain applications. Like we solved the problem of linear separability. We could quickly run backprop, but there were still lots of problems. Like we had variable length problem causing gradient problems. Data is rarely labeled. Neural networks are uninterpretable. Yes, Lyle always complains about that.
I do.
Indeed. I also complain about neural networks being uninterpretable. Let's be clear, Lyle and me are very much on the same page here. But importantly, there were all those problems though, and that is what deep learning research was then at a later point of time. And then people figured out a lot of, or made progress on all of those. And like they figured out the idea of forget gates, basically. Systems that don't forget until you explicitly tell them to forget something. They started using DQN, SOMs, all kinds of approaches to use unlabeled data really well. Today, many of the best applications that we have of deep learning are not primarily supervised learning. You use all the data you have and you use them in interesting ways. There are issues with neural networks not using information well. And like today, you probably saw the breakthroughs of transformer architectures. Attention allows the focus on a small number of informative items. Encoding creates more compact semantic representations and so forth. So I just want to show you a few of the cool things that people do with GANs. By the end of the course, you should be able to meaningfully understand what's happening within these models. It doesn't mean that you can train it yourself, because the other thing that happened, which I don't have a slide for, is basically the data sets get so big and the required compute get to be so big despite all our GPUs, that state-of-the-art models are no longer things that academics can train, not even the super rich labs. And they're mostly, the big models are being run by industry at the moment. And that leads us to a new set of really, really annoying problems. So let's see here. Can I play this? So here we have a style-based architecture for GANs. So all images in the video are produced by our generator here. They take source data, and now they can change. They take gender, age, hair length, glasses, and pose from something, and then they can use different images to change everything here. So we have wonderful systems that can produce fake images of people that never actually existed. Wonderful, isn't it? What could possibly go wrong with it? But at the same time, as a technical demo, this is like super impressive. Like they basically just change the input styles and everything changes. And they can say there's multiple levels. There's a coarse level, pose, hair. And you have like, there they changed the coarse style, like male, female, hairdo, things like that. In the middle style, like maybe like some earrings, some different kinds of wrinkles. And then they look at the fine style. Look at what happens to the skin. So they can basically have aspect of faces that happen at different scales. So for people that are used to the way we could generate images in the past, this is just mind-blowing. Like these images, like it's hard for humans to distinguish them from real photographs. It is possible. I'll be happy to, when we talk about GANs, I'll be happy to tell you how to recognize these things. But it's absolutely incredible, the quality that we have there. And people feel that means that we now really understand something fundamental about it. I'm not so sure about that. But it's still clearly a key technology. In particular, if you want to produce fake reviews on Amazon or something, you can upload like nice photographs here. But this is GANs. GANs are incredible, like that we can have generators that produce this quality of of data is incredible. We can see similarly unbelievable things when we look about at computer vision, like automatic image captioning. Here, we take that image, give that image to our neural network, and it says, man in a black shirt is playing the guitar. Yeah, that sounds about right. I might have described it like this. I'm not sure if he's probably playing. But it's a perfectly fine caption. Construction worker in orange safety vest is walking on a road. Yeah, sounds about right. 2 young girls playing with Lego toy. Yeah, it's Lego. Like I played a lot with my kids with Lego. There's something not quite right. I would probably say like not 2 young girls, but like 1 very young kid. But it's very close. I mean, like it's so much further than where machine learning was, say, a decade earlier.
And if I can interrupt, Conrad, we'll also see that they're not quite that reliable, and that the best cherry-picked examples are awesome. And we'll see how some of these things fail rather catastrophically. Image captioning is a great example of something that appears superhuman and then appears idiotically stupid. And we'll get a little more insight in this course into both how it works so well and how it works so badly, I hope.
Yeah, and I mean, like, imagine it would decide of like, this person should take the following medicine. We might be a little worried about that. Or this person should go to prison. This person carries a big gun and should go to prison. And this person carries a big gun and should therefore go to prison. We want to be very careful about that. Because these systems don't understand, and we will be talking about a lot as we go forward. These systems, in a way, or deep learning systems in general, are not by default about getting an understanding. They're about being good at the task that you set them up to do. Good. GPT-3, I can just highly recommend. There exists multiple web pages where you can play with it. You can basically talk with a text generator, and sometimes it's impressive. Wow, that's like something that like my parents could say. And sometimes it's just like, this is ridiculous. For example, in the example of that they gave when they came out with GPT-3, they say there's this group of unicorns that live on an island, and most shockingly, they speak English. So after answering a few sentences of perfectly good ideas about that, they said, well, this group of that group of unicorns that all have 2 horns are walking around. Like, hello, you didn't understand that unicorn means that there's 1 horn. You just realized that often words like horn occur in 1, 2, or 3 in different things, and then most animals have 2 horns, and therefore you just thought that they probably have 2 horns. So there are these things that are really deeply missing on it, while at the same time, like, that thing is better at grammar than me. And I've been writing an awful lot of papers over time. So here's another cool example about, that's the last example that I show you. Like, look, I know I don't need to convince you that
on Earth, the simple rules
that
of
deep learning is great, but I want us to like briefly look at a few cool things. Okay, so
can also lead to intelligent behavior.
They train these systems so that they're good at hiding. So the blue ones have to hide from the red ones. So you see, they start learning how to run away.
This is a hard world for a hider who has only learned to flee. However, after training in millions of rounds of hide and seek, the hiders find a solution. The hiders learn to use rudimentary tools to their advantage by grabbing a
look, and then they start blocking doors.
Notice the millions of trials.
that's right. It's something that you would probably do straight from the get-go.
For any single individual. The hiders are not the only ones who can learn to use tools. After many generations of failing to break into the shelter, the seekers learn to jump over obstacles using ramps. However, after many millions of rounds of having their shelter breached, the hiders learn to take away the primary tool the seekers have at their disposal.
Look, it just takes millions and millions of repetitions.
Not explicitly incentivize any of these behaviors. As each team learns a new skill, it implicitly changes the challenges the other team faces, creating a new pressure to adapt.
Okay, I don't want to keep dwelling on that, but I think we are in this situation where at the same time, deep learning clearly allows us to solve a lot of problems that we couldn't solve before. But at the same time, where there's a lot of hype being made about situations that is maybe not justified by what the situation really really gives. So it's a new decade. We have old problems. And like, what are the problems of deep learning? It extrapolates poorly when the data set is too specialized. So if I have some data set here in some situation, I will not be great. This is particularly important because the future is always different from the past. So we are never like in the same data set. It's poor transferring across domains. What it learned in one situation, it's not very good at using in other situations. It's very hard to explain and audit it. It's still extremely data hungry. Yes, like they did like millions of rounds of hide and seek. I'm telling you, if you would play it, it would take you like 3 rounds to discover these strategies, like not rocket science. It's about the past and not the future. And like machine learning and deep learning as an example of that is generally about empirical risk minimization. We have some data set, we get more data that is the same. Let's have algorithms that are good at doing that thing. Whereas that is not at all what we do in life. What we do is we learn about how the world works and then we apply it to new situations. And there's many, many more problems, of course. Now, to just wrap this up with a nice quote by Jan LeCun, there's almost as much BS being written about a purported impending AI winter as there is around a purported impending AGI explosion. And so there is the other side. There are the guys who are like, oh my God, machine learning has made so much progress. We don't need humans in the future. It's all just like gradient descent learning. Where in reality, right at this time, this point of time, there might be a significant proportion of all humans on this planet whose job it is to produce training data for maybe not so intelligent machine learning systems. So we have this simultaneous thing that there's like probably millions of people producing training data. And at the same time, this belief that deep learning will make humans irrelevant very, very quickly. The problem is the future is always different from the past. So this brings us back to just this one point that I want to bring home. Now, this is a weird format. You need to know what you're signing up for. We will meet for an in-person lecture and question-answer period, a bit like what we do right now every week. You will also meet with, you will do these notebooks that are full of exercises where you actually do it, because if you don't do it, you will not have it in your skill set in the future. And you will be working in a group to make sure that what you understood is in a way like intellectual yours, that you really get it, that you really understand the implications of it. And the format might be weird. We believe that you will learn more and that it's useful. We just want you to know what you sign up for. This is the way we're going to run this. And looking forward, do your 2 worksheet minus the discussion related parts by Monday, 1 p.m. each week. Hold on, Anka, didn't you say we moved that to Sunday?
We changed that so that students don't have to like work the whole weekend. They can technically be completed Monday until 1 p.m. And we don't have any earlier parts than 1 p.m.
Okay, wonderful. Then prepare questions. So the goal for the parts, for the group-based learning, is that you learn from one another, which means while you go through the notebooks, don't just do the notebooks. Do the notebooks, but figure out what are the things that you're really clear about and the things where you're like, no, you don't quite understand why that just worked, so that you can then ask that. And the questions you can also ask in then the next live session. This week we'll only have one. This week will be a little extra short. Like we start now, which is Thursday, and then on Monday you'll submit, and then next Thursday we'll have the next lecture. And things to do now, join our Slack, make a copy of the first worksheets and submit them by January 17th and complete the sign-up sheet by tomorrow. And the reason why this...
Sorry, Conrad, I think you have an old version of the slides. I updated that with the sign-up sheets link as well.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But we need those in the chat anyway.
Yeah,
so for everybody, the Slack is in the chat.
The Slack's in the chat. We will be uploading this information also to the chat so that you all have it. And I don't know why my Google Sheets is pulling from a different place where it's not updated.
We will also be sending out all relevant information via email this week. After that, we will move communications to Slack.
Great. And so that leaves us to Anka. Anka was going to tell us more about the ethics components.
Yes. Do you want me to share my screen, given that I think I have the most up-to-date version?
Yes.
Awesome. Just a second. Let me figure out this whole Zoom thing. Can you see my screen?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Love that. Yes, as I mentioned in my introduction, we will not only look at the technical side of deep learning, but also at the implications it can have on society. And there we go. Okay, there's the slide change. So with an increasing amount of data being available, AI is being basically embedded into just about every aspect of your life, be it personal or your work life, from credit card applications to informing criminal sentencing to resume screening, your Facebook feeds, you name it. And while we don't want to paint like an all dark Terminator-like picture of deep learning, we want to make you aware of the pitfalls deep learning might come along with. And we'll go over some of these examples in the course. And for some of them, you'll probably already have an idea what might go wrong. But also seemingly safe deep learning applications can have actual real life ethical implications. For example, Boston thought it would be a super good idea to automate the detection of its 20,000 plus potholes in the city. They launched a pothole detection app to help with the allocation of resources and make that more efficiently, which basically made use of a phone's GPS and accelerometer data, and then use that to passively detect potholes and report them to the city. Great idea on paper. However, they didn't think to take into account that the smartphone penetration among poor neighborhoods is significantly lower compared to richer neighborhoods. And subsequently, in those areas, they detected less potholes. That means that areas that are already wealthy would have benefited more from road repairs and hence better infrastructure, which would have led to an increase in inequality, which is exactly what they didn't want. Boston fortunately became aware of that issue early enough, but that was a bias that they didn't foresee in the first place, so that they just found while starting to deploy the model. And you might wonder why you should care about it. After all, you're just a programmer. The problem is that the question of responsibility hasn't been settled yet. And spoiler, we will actually discuss that later in the course. Plus, as a developer, you understand the technical side of things, which a lot of other parties, like politicians, for example, might not. This gives you a certain power to see potential issues and actually voice concerns. And depending on how the discussion about responsibility goes, you might actually be held accountable at some point for your models for whatever you program. And finally, that's a very personal point, but in my opinion, it's just the morally right thing to do, to think about what kind of implications your work actually has on the broader community you're living in. And that's a slide that Conrad put together that basically shows where in a system things can go wrong. And we will come back to that over the course of the class. But we wanted to give you a quick glimpse into where in the pipeline things might go wrong when you're developing a deep learning model. Whether you're in a more managerial position and subconsciously choosing projects that benefit basically your group, or whether you're collecting data that represents the world as it is, namely very, very biased and not as you want it to be, you can have an influence on these things if you're aware of them. And that's where we actually want to get you with this class as well. In CIS 522, we'll be all about asking questions, and my slide didn't change. Yes, it did. Perfect. And quite frankly, we don't have the answers to most of these questions, but also we want to get you thinking about the broader implications of your work, of your programming, and hear what your thoughts are on it. These might include questions such as, like, why is the data biased or imbalanced in the first place? What if we're asking for fairness from criminal sentencing models, for example? Is it okay for us to say more criminals are freed or a greater number of innocent people are getting incarcerated? These are like all questions you have to take into account when you want to actually make your models a bit more ethical, fairer, however you want to call it. And we will be discussing these questions in pods, homework assignments, and we'll hopefully, depending on how COVID goes, have some guest lectures as well. But yeah, that has a big like star attached to it, depending on how the situation evolves. We, I think, had this slide. Yes, just a couple of remarks on the week 1 logistics that Conrad already pulled up. You will all get the link to join our Slack right after this lecture. Please do so. As I mentioned, that will be our primary communication channel starting next week. You will get all relevant information this week by email, but starting next week, that won't be happening anymore. Also, the sign-up sheet includes TA bios, the times that the pods will be happening. And we are asking you to put in your preferences, tell us a bit more about yourself so that we can actually like match you to your pod leaders. However, we cannot promise that all of you will get your preferences, but we're doing our best. Pod allocation will happen over the weekend. So you should have by Sunday evening, hopefully, all of your pods assigned to you. And then lastly, again, as Conrad mentioned, we are starting with the first worksheet this week. Will be more of an intro to Pytorch. Like we're going fairly slow in the beginning. What you have to do to complete your worksheets is go on our GitHub page. You will find the worksheet there. It would be read-only. So you have to make a copy to your Google Drive, for example, work in that worksheet. And then at the end of it, you will find a section that will explain how to submit it to Airtable. That will actually be our major submission channel for this course, both for worksheets and homeworks. Deadlines are for the sign-up sheet this Friday in the evening so that we can actually assign you over the weekend to the pods, and for the first worksheet this Monday at 1 p.m. And I think that's it for me.
So Anka, there are a couple of big questions that are recurring in the chat, which I think is worth noting. I think the meta comment is go to the Slack channel. You have to actually create an account to get onto that one. And once you're on the Slack channel, then we will make sure everything is there. There will be a channel for asking questions. We will post there where to find the links to the slides. So there are lots of specific questions. Where do I find X? And I think the simplest answer is find everything on Slack. We will share things there because many things will vanish. The chat window here will go away. So everything will be there. If you can't get onto Slack and you have actually created an account, email me, Anka, Conrad, one of us will figure things out for you.
I just posted the join link to Slack, to that specific Slack channel, not Slack channel, but the workspace, however you call that in Slack. If you've tried to sign up yourself, not using the invite link, try it with the invite link first. If that doesn't work, reach out. We will also, again, send out the invite link and everything you need to know by email later today. The worksheets will be on GitHub, which will also be posted in Slack and communicated by email. Oh, Monday is actually a holiday. I didn't know that. I'm in Germany and we don't have that. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I suppose we're moving the deadline to Tuesday this week then. So Tuesday, 1 p.m., same thing.
Well, hold on, we should make it Tuesday noon, no? Because Tuesday is lecture.
Okay, we make it Tuesday noon. I'll post that in the email and Slack later as well.
Cool.
Any more questions? Logistics, content, whatever. Yes, there will be a quiz this week, a short one. I think it's 4 questions about the first worksheet. You will find the quiz at the end of each worksheet. That will go into the Airtable submission that we're asking for. The submission mechanism is explained at the worksheet at the end. Yes, you can access Slack if you don't have a CIS email address. If that doesn't work with the invite link, let me know. We'll figure something out. The Airtable link will be that's actually included in the worksheets. So you will, once you hit the end of the worksheet, there's like a form that appears which allows you to submit. Sign-up sheets will be both emailed and posted on Slack. Also, it has a big submission button underneath the form that you just have to hit to submit.
And the worksheets and the homeworks are human graded, not auto graded. It's somewhere between completion grading. It's not completion grading in the CIS 520, type in 3 blank spaces and 3 Z's, you got it right. It actually is, you should be doing them and learning them, but it's not gonna be rigorously graded. The main point in this course is 90% of learning stuff is showing up. Show up for the pods, do the worksheets, think about the questions. Okay, there are right and wrong answers in most of machine learning. And we will get all the details about the final project later. It's not going to start till the last third of the course. So you've got plenty of time for that, right?
Yes.
The thing to worry about now are just get on Slack and figure out from there how to start the first worksheets. They should be straightforward. All of you should have seen the core Pytorch stuff. This will help to swap it back into memory.
Correct. I'm just going through the questions in the chat. You don't have
if
to
you do
wait
not, if you do, so question about permits. If you've been told that you are accepted into the course, then don't worry about the permits. Go ahead and sign up. We'll figure out the permits. If you have not been told you're accepted into the course, then there's probably no space for you and you should not be signing up for pods.
Correct, what Lyle said. About pod decisions, they will probably come out Sunday evening, maybe Monday, given that we have a holiday now. You do not have to start until the pod decisions are out for starting with the worksheet. However, you have to wait until you submit them because one of the fields will say pod. So you need to know your pod before you submit, but you can already start it, like almost finish it. How many submissions are allowed for the worksheets and the quizzes? That's a different, like, it's kind of like a hard question because technically we don't have a limit on them, but we're using Airtable. So each submission will go on as a separate entry. And you're making our life extremely hard if you submit more than once. You can change your answers, you can submit multiple times, but please, please, please only do it if you really want to change it, and please only submit when you're really ready. Otherwise, that would be a lot of like data cleanup stuff on our end that we really don't want to do.
2 things. First of all, Airtable, which many people have not seen, is a sort of cool database with a nice front end, which will attach through the Jupyter notebooks. So you will see all those auto-linked from the notebooks. There'll be a submit button. It will then automatically write to our little backend database. And secondly, to be clear, the pods are only for people who are taking the course for credit. Observers are welcome to actually watch the lectures, play with the notebooks. All these things are open source and available. The course, however, the discussions require a consistent set of people signed up. That's the limiting factor, is time for the TAs and me. So no observers or auditors in the pods, please. And don't worry, people will throw you out if you show up.
We are piloting automated email confirmations that you submitted in Airtable. If that doesn't work, please let me know. You likely do not receive the answers in your email. You likely receive just an email confirming that you submitted. but I need to see how we do that. If that's relevant for people to actually get the answers that they submitted in an email, we can try. I can't promise. That's my first time working with Airtable as well, but I guess there's some way to do it.
And we will post information about all the TAs to help guide the pod selection, similarly to what we did in 520.
About the TAs, they filled out bios in like a really nice PDF slideshow. And that link will be posted in the pod sign up sheet. So you will get to like know your TAs a bit before you sign up for the pods. Yeah, that they will basically comment on what their research interests are, what like group they're focusing on. Is it like beginners of deep learning, advanced people, and which pod times they have.
And we'll post
Project
a bunch of pod hours, all this information. I think a lot of what you want is, yes, this will come soon, soon, soon. Who's leading the pods? When are the time options? All that is in the sign up sheet.
Yes. And yes, as Lyle commented, projects will be dealt with later. Don't think about them now. No need for that. You'll have enough time at the end. We promise.
Cool. We are basically at time. It's super exciting to have everybody here. We've got an awesome set of TAs who will be guiding your journey. And we will see you all early and often on Slack.
Cool. Looking forward to a great course.
Thanks for being here today. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Link to join our Slack.